Imagine surviving a devastating flood only to find shelter in a house haunted by vengeful spirits. This is the story of The Cursed Shelter, where survivors discover that the real terror is within their supposed protection. Press play and get ready for fear. It was a normal day in the small town of Riverside, located on the banks of a large river. The people were used to heavy rains, but nothing could have prepared them for the disaster that was about to unfold. Torrential rains turned the river into a destructive force, breaking dams and flooding the town in a matter of hours. Homes were destroyed, streets became raging rivers, and life as they knew it was completely devastated. Among the survivors were Emily, a 32-year-old teacher, and John, a 40-year-old firefighter. They met while searching for survivors in the higher parts of town. Both had lost everything in the flood and decided to join forces to find shelter. During the search for a safe place, they spotted an old abandoned mansion on top of a hill, seemingly untouched by the waters. Desperate for a safe place, Emily and John, along with other survivors they found along the way, decided to take shelter in the mansion. Upon entering the house, they were greeted by an oppressive silence and a heavy atmosphere. The mansion was covered in dust, but seemed sturdy enough to serve as a temporary refuge. However, there was something strange in the air, something that made their skin crawl and their senses stay on alert. At first, the survivors were relieved to find a dry and safe place. They organized their belongings, distributed supplies, and prepared to spend the night. But as darkness settled in, the mansion began to reveal its sinister secrets. Emily noticed that the shadows seemed to move strangely, and John felt a constant presence as if they were being watched. On the first night, strange noises echoed through the corridors. Doors creaked, footsteps could be heard, but there was no one there. Emily woke up in a cold sweat after having a nightmare where she saw dark figures around her bed, whispering incomprehensible words. Determined to keep everyone safe, John decided to investigate but found nothing but dark hallways and empty rooms. As the days passed, the supernatural events intensified. Objects moved on their own, voices whispered names, and spectral figures appeared in mirrors. One night, one of the survivors, Sarah, disappeared without a trace. Her scream echoed through the house, but when everyone ran to see what had happened, they found nothing but an empty room and a growing sense of terror. Emily, determined to find out what was happening, found an old diary hidden in a dusty drawer. The diary belonged to the mansion's former owner, a man named Jonathan Blackwood. Through the yellowed pages, she discovered that the mansion had been the scene of horrible tragedies. Jonathan was a cruel man who performed dark rituals and sacrificed innocents to gain power. The spirits of Jonathan's victims were trapped in the mansion, seeking revenge. They would not let anyone leave alive, wishing to make every person who entered there suffer as they had suffered. Emily, sharing this discovery with the others, realized that they were all in great danger. They needed to find a way to appease the spirits' fury or risk dying at their hands. Attempts to escape the mansion were all thwarted. Each time they tried to leave, they were pushed back by an invisible force. Doors locked on their own, windows shut, and hallways seemed to stretch infinitely, leading them back to where they started. Fear turned into desperation when another person mysteriously disappeared, leaving only a trail of blood. John, with his experience as a firefighter, suggested that they try to exorcise the spirits using methods he had learned in psychological rescue training. But nothing worked. The spirits seemed to feed on the fear and suffering of the living. Every attempt to face them resulted in more terror and more losses. In a last desperate effort, Emily suggested performing a ritual described in Jonathan's diary. It was risky, but it seemed to be the only way to appease the vengeful spirits. They gathered all the necessary items and prepared to perform the ritual at midnight. The instructions were clear, but fraught with danger. Any mistake could mean death for all of them. The atmosphere grew even heavier as the hour of the ritual approached. Lights flickered, whispers turned to screams, and the entire mansion seemed alive, trying to stop the ritual. However, with determination, Emily and John began the process, reciting the words from the diary and offering the necessary sacrifices. The candles went out, and a deep darkness enveloped everyone. At the peak of the ritual, the spirits manifested in full force. The walls shook, spectral figures surrounded the group, and the air was filled with a biting cold. Emily and John, in a desperate effort, continued to recite the words, even as they felt their own lives being drained. A deafening scream filled the mansion, and for a moment, everything stopped. The mansion was engulfed in a burst of energy, throwing everyone to the ground. When they opened their eyes, They realized that the figures had disappeared. Silence took over, and for a moment they thought they were safe. But as they looked around, they noticed that the mansion had changed. The walls were covered in blood, and the faces of Jonathan's victims were etched into the surfaces, staring directly at them. The momentary peace was shattered when they realized that the spirits had not been appeased but fully awakened. The mansion became a labyrinth of horror, with the spirits now more furious and powerful. Emily and John, along with the few remaining survivors, desperately tried to find an exit, but the mansion seemed to close in around them. Screams of agony echoed through the corridors, and one by one, the survivors were taken by the vengeful spirits. Emily and John, exhausted and hopeless, found themselves trapped in a room with no way out, feeling the spirit's presence slowly approaching, ready to claim their lives. The terror culminated when Emily, in a last act of desperation, tried to destroy the diary, believing it could free them. But as soon as the diary caught fire, a macabre laugh filled the room. The spirits materialized, revealing their grotesque and hate-filled forms. Emily and John were consumed by the darkness, their screams muffled by the sound of the triumphant spirits. The mansion remained silent after the tragedy. For the few who survived the flood and learned of the story, Blackwood Mansion became a cursed place, avoided by all. The vengeful spirits continued to haunt the old house, waiting for new victims who dared to cross their path. Want part 2 of this story? Leave it in the comments. If you have a horror story and want to see it published on our channel, send us your story.